going from Verizon $3 billion plus budget to like a $3 million budget, like you become pretty dialed into like, okay, like how are you going to get attention? The creative process itself is so far downstream that I was like, I need to get upstream. I realized that I've got to flip it on its head because otherwise you're just going to be frustrated. I felt those pressures and those cracks when I was at DDB, 2014. I was like, this model doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Everything was going down. Yeah.
And I really saw it in the way in which it operated, more so than like the creative talent and things like that. It wasn't a talent issue. It was an operating issue. Let's be mindful of what we're putting out in the world, right? Like, let's not just put more junk into the world. Also, we're an AI company, right? The physicality of things is only going to become more important. The craft of things is only going to become more important.
Welcome to Second Wind. I'm Gully Flowers, flying solo today. My guest is Andrew McKechnie, Head of Business Creative Studio at OpenAI. Before that, he was SVP Chief Creative Officer at Verizon. For that, Global Head of Design Group at Apple. So yeah, pretty decent resume. Andrew oversaw a $3 billion marketing budget at Verizon and built a 300-person in-house agency that went on to win more than 300 international awards, including a gold can line, a D and AD yellow pencils. So many pencils, so many colors. We all know yellow is the best. An Emmy nomination, and 6 straight Webby wins. In his spare time, he made vodka out of CO2 and lived and led teams across Singapore, Boston, San Francisco, Auckland, and New York. He's taught at NYU Stern, was born in Nairobi, and raised across Southeast Asia and New Zealand. Andrew, welcome to Second Wind.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
How did you become a creative?
I actually started an internship in Singapore after studying at Auckland University of Technology, and I was trying to figure out a way to get into the creative industry. And I actually went through the door of account management.
There you go. Suit.
Within the first...
Because you went to DDB as well, right? I was a suit at DDB too.
Yeah. DDB was probably agency stop number 4 or 5, but I started at Foot Cone and Belding.
There you go.
Which, bless them, no longer around as well.
Yeah, same with DDB.
Same with DDB, same with Young and Rubicam, same with JWT, same with Modernista. Yeah. I mean, all my agency kind of stints are now,
bunch of grave starts,
except for BBDO. So BBDO is the only one that's still technically standing. I started as technically a suit in the first week, and then I beeline to the ECD at the time, and I said, I want to be a creative. I always wanted to be a creative. And he's like, what can you do? Can you use Photoshop? What, can you write? And I said, I can write. And he's like, okay, well, let's get you writing and let's see how you go. I spent 3 months at, doing that internship. And at the end of it, he was like, great, you're hired as a junior copywriter.
Your title is head of business now, right?
Yeah.
So like you're kind of almost going back to being a suit in a way, but I know you're in creative studio at OpenAI. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing today.
There is a bit of a full circle story. Technically, I studied a Bachelor of Business, and in marketing and advertising, that kind of perspective carried through in a lot of the roles that I've played throughout my career, and also how I've ended up on brand side, running larger creative organizations where the role of strategy and like what a suit would have traditionally done is very much part of the job and part of leadership overall. Head of business creative now at Creative Studio OpenAI, overseeing really like the foundation of how we build the brand for developers, SMB enterprises. So it's a really interesting intersection for me because I've always been really interested in all types of technology. Obviously, we're at another inflection point, but also just the ability for me to help shape brand narrative in a really nascent kind of category, and defining what that looks like is really exciting, and cutting across really interesting audience groups as well. People that are really at the frontier of testing the technology with startups and developers. But then also as you scale and you think about how does that actually become a reality for small businesses or for enterprises at large scale, it's a lot of different pieces to put together there. But it's a fascinating challenge for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting to talk about like brand building. The AI journey over the past 4 years since GPT dropped in November 2022. It's been interesting because it's been the worst thing ever or the best thing ever. Obviously, we went through Big Tech 2.0, which I think was the Metas, the Googles, right? And they had to build brands too, which is good for creative people like us. And I thought some of the brand work that was done in the AI space, specifically in 25, was just really powerful. Anthropic did a great campaign. I think it was with Mother. That I loved until I saw the Isle of Any work that you guys did.
Yeah.
Which to me was just such as a bit of an ad nerd,
Yeah.
it was just such a magical campaign because it was incredibly simple.
Yeah.
It felt incredibly cinematic.
Yeah.
The music was amazing, but it wasn't like a big track that everyone had heard of. It was so tightly connected to the product. You know, to me, that's what the best advertising and brand building does. It feels core to the product, but it talks about it in a way that's, you know, cinematic and evokes feelings, like positive feelings towards the brand.
Yeah.
But in a very sort of quiet, unassuming way that really talks about the experience of using the product.
That team has got amazing taste and pedigree, and Zach and Tabby and the guys, we've all been part of pretty major shifts of the industry, technology. We've all worked at the big tech companies. It's a little bit of like getting back to basics in terms of what makes iconic brand work, but also try to like get out of the way again in terms of like just simply explaining what these products and technology do. That I think in the hype cycle of the last couple of years, it's been very hard to know what these products are and what they mean to people, right? And so I think the emotional aspect and feeling something like for what this technology is, I think is important. I think that campaign definitely, helped do that.
The product experience, right, which is mostly text-based, was brought in there almost like a credits roll.
Yep.
And then the way that the mark was there at the end, it really did feel like a moment from a film. The thing that's interesting about this for me is that it's quite rare to see that, right?
Well,
to take this big tech company and distill it into a really like almost like artful piece of creative.
Yeah. And look, like I think it goes back to a perspective I have as well in terms of like how work gets created at different brands. And it's not just I think there's maybe an assumption that anyone can just go and create like iconic, beautiful work, but it comes down to like the people.
Magic button.
Yeah, like the people is what makes iconic work. The team on that particular work comes from like a really strong sensibility around humanity and caring about craft. And I think that's the type of thing that then resonates in the work, because the people care and they want to bring humanity to the stories. And I think that then that gets reflected, in terms of how the brand is showing up.
And how do you do that at a big tech organization? Because I feel like there's an inherent tension there between sort of like creatives and, people in quarter zips in San Francisco who want to just build products that don't need advertising and don't need brands. A big part of your career has been back to the thing about the suits is like stakeholder management, convincing people who maybe aren't as familiar with brand building and what that means and advertising and the simplicity of a human story. Like, is that really the work of someone like yourself? It's like trying to bring people into this journey of building the brand.
Yeah, oftentimes that's just where I've often centered the work and the energy is around finding these more emotional stories to bring to the forefront, because when you're trying to bring an organization along for the ride and you're trying to introduce a new format to them, or you're trying to get them to make a shift in the way in which you want to bring a message to the market, you kind of have to show them. You have to present a way forward for them. And oftentimes when it has more emotional relevance and resonance for them, I think that's where there's a bit of an unlock. It's hard to deny that type of work. And oftentimes that's what I use as a first foray into helping people within the organization understand that there's ways of communicating our products that can try and find that intersection between technology and product features and humanity. And when you get that right, I think it can be very powerful.
What you're talking about is really different to, I think, where you probably started, right? Which is like the career of a creative, doing the work, writing,
Totally.
creating a portfolio. At some point you shift into more of a leadership role. What's that been like for you?
From an agency perspective, I think that's generally the life cycle of how creatives come up through the system. Is you are given briefs to essentially execute against, and they're very much seen and worked in isolation of what's really happening, but you're trying to put the best idea out there, right? And that's really what you become known for. That's what you strive for, is like the best, what are you putting in your portfolio? And so I obviously was part of doing that for the first maybe 10 years of my career. But I think like at some point you realize that it's a little bit of blind luck if you're just trying to put a great idea down on paper and thinking that it's going to get bought. And if
everyone will believe in it.
Yeah. And that everyone's just it's just like, yes, like, and we're going to go for it. And now when I think about ideas that did get through, it probably was a lot of luck, because the reality is that you're not operating with the full amount of information that you actually need to create an amazing piece of work. And so I think the shift of leadership for me moved from being an independent creator to trying to understand what the full ecosystem of creative impact, what you require there to be able to actually put amazing work out into the ether. And so what I realized then was that, okay, actually I need to get more upstream. I need to kind of work with the planners and the strategists. I need to understand how briefs are actually coming into the system and what's account management actually doing there. And the creative process itself is so far downstream that I was like, I need to get upstream. And so I did that through the agency model, and I just need to get closer to what the client is asking. And then eventually that pursuit led to being like, well, I need to then get closer to the product. So I got to go brand side. How do I influence the work at the beginning of that process, right? And so through the marketers, through the briefings, through the agency, all the way down, it was like, I think I realized that like I've got to flip it on its head, because otherwise you're just going to be frustrated, which a lot of creators are frustrated because they're like, they changed the brief or they killed it. And it's like, well, yeah, probably for good reasons, actually. Not always, but there's probably
not because they don't like you.
Yeah, there's probably something there. And that really began my journey of like, I'm going to become much more business minded capability and focus. My ambition is still the same. It's still like create the best creative work, right? But my approach to it is shifted a lot.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a trend we see, right? Is like creatives who realize they do need to push upstream in order to have the impact they want to have. But that changes the work, right? Like, what do you think are the most like critical elements of that? Is it like building relationships with the CEO and the CFO to try and get that trust that they will let you take these big creative swings?
Yeah, I think you have to have a bit of patience when you walk into like, let's say an Apple. For me, that was probably a good like foray onto brand side. But at the same time, it was kind of like the culture of creativity already existed. So it was less about convincing people to do good work. That was a different type of environment where it's like, no, you need to create the best work of your life. And so the pedigree and the kind of pressure to, find amazing and create amazing work was there. Whereas I think the kind of the shift to Verizon was a much different type of environment that did not necessarily have a culture of creativity or design as its core operating system. It's a very highly operational and very well run organization. Therefore, I needed to work with the teams there to kind of really build a creative muscle that didn't exist. And that means that I had to also work with the equivalent of the CEOs of those groups, the consumer group, the business group, the media group, on the commercial marketing side, so the business units, and make sure that they believed and felt that I actually understood the business, right? Because one of the first goals I had when I started as an SVP, young punk coming in, Chief Creative Officer. So, okay, what does he know about the business? And one of my first conversations with the head of the business at the time was just kind of like, can you tell me what our objectives are this week and how many net ads we have? I didn't have that answer. I probably wouldn't have and shouldn't have had that answer at that point, but it was a test to be like, do you understand what the work is that you're going to go and create needs to do? Walking into a very different type of environment where it's going to have to be, okay, I understand what the business needs to do, and I have a creative solution that I think can address that. What we all need to do as we think about the creative role and leadership is to help the business, bring them solutions and bring them ideas that help solve their toughest challenges. Once I was able to do that and demonstrate that the work was having an impact, and then I think you see a very different posture in terms of the way in which the commercial marketers really then embrace creativity, and they give you a wider berth and being able to actually go and execute things. And there's more trust. Like, you have to build trust there. You can't just go in and be like, I've done all this amazing.
I'm here to fix it all.
Trust me, I'm gonna it's like, yeah. I've seen it all before.
We're doing storytelling now, guys.
Yeah. So, and you also see like a lot of brands have like, cycle in and out of CMOs. And so the business can be pretty skeptical of CMO groups and also like new people coming in and, trying to push for new things. And so you really have to build those relationships and the trust there. And so that takes time, and then you get those first few wins. But within 18 months there, I think we were demonstrating that there was a creative pedigree, attention to craft, attention to detail, and all the things that started to really impact. And then that had a compounding effect over time.
And so you built a 300-person in-house shop at Verizon. So clearly you've had experience on the, more traditional agency side. There's been a pretty big breakdown, obviously, in the legacy models of like how the business works.
Yeah.
Given all that, what do you see? And, it's probably not a one size fits all, but how do you see the model of the future? Obviously, the holding companies are under a lot of pressure. It's been exciting to see all the creative boutiques pop up, like Isle of Any, who you guys are obviously working with.
Yeah.
What do you think is the model of the future, given a lot of those big iconic agencies have just gone?
I felt those pressures and those cracks when I was at DDB, which was like 2014, I think, was when I was like, this model doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Everything was going down. Yeah.
And I really saw it in the way in which it operated, more so than like the creative talent and things like that. It wasn't a talent issue. It was an operating issue in how we were, charging clients. And it was the first time that I really experienced one of those moments where it was just kind of like, it took a year to get to an agreement with a big global client on what the retainer was going to be. And then in the interim, we were just like kind of getting a monthly scope. And, I would be working on campaigns, and then I would get a call from the CFO, and he'd be like, midway through, he's like, oh, you need to stop all freelance. And it's like, how is this working? But the expectations of delivering the work was still there. There were just so many cracks in the way in which the model was working out that really got me started to think about like, is there a different pathway. Part of that decision process was, okay, if I go to another agency, is it going to be more of the same? Like, probably. And I think brand side, I think that shift and then the in-house build outs over the last 10 years has kind of also like modulated from like big swings to large in-house creative groups to then kind of dismantling those teams, which I've seen across different brands as well, and then building them back up again. And I think the thing to be mindful of there is that you kind of need to build a model that can sustain and be valuable to an organization through the ups and the downs, and also maybe don't over-index on having a very large in-house team unless you can support it through very specific types of work streams that support the brand, but also keep it moving in ways in which the in and outs of how changes happen don't impact those teams. I think every brand has a different in-house model. I think it really depends on where that brand is and its life cycle. What does it need in that moment? And I think most brands should have some curators and people that understand the brand and have a focus on craft. Having a good design team that can help to think about how the brand shows up holistically is important. I think you need storytellers in different formats to help to shape what the narrative should be for a brand. But I've always thought about it in the sense of like, where do you tap into the best talent wherever it is? For me, it's always been hybrid model works best, where it's like, well, I probably want to work with the best agencies, right? Like they have a specific role, especially the small and mid-sized ones right now. You're buying it like one of the best creative teams and strategy teams, right? And you don't need all the other infrastructure, because I think that infrastructure often is what carries the extra burden and cost. So if you have an in-house team that can help to do some of what would traditionally be project management, account management, or production management, like, then do you need to be paying for that, with an agency? Maybe not. But it depends on how these brands are structured, right? So it's challenging, because I think a lot of brands, and I've, post my Verizon kind of time, a lot of people are like, hey, we want you to build an in-house agency. And it's like, well, I don't think they know what they are actually asking. And it's not,
everything's in-house now. We want everything in-house.
Yeah.
It's cheaper.
It's not a matter of just like building a repeatable format. You really need to understand how that team works and what are they actually selling? Like, what are their products? It's complicated, but I think that shift to smaller, mid-sized agencies and just being a little bit more nimble is a reflection of, I think, a lot of people are just looking to work with the best people and really just find ways to execute and do great work without a lot of the bureaucracy and the layers that exist.
You have creative people on one end who tend to be like seen as they'll make a funny commercial or something. And then you have further upstream business leads who typically siloed in terms of the customer experience. How do you bring those folks together to make the customer experience feel cohesive and enable those creatives to have a big impact on the business?
There are times when I think it's important to be pretty deliberate about how you build the team and how much interface they need with clients or their counterparts, on whether it's a marketing team or the business team, because they don't always need to have that exposure. And so I think for me, I'm pretty deliberate about the types of teams and people that I bring in who I know are going to be really good at just fostering a solid relationship and building that trust that allows us to then go and do great work. And then there are others that I think like shouldn't really have that burden, that I think can work more in a pure creative space. And you try to take away the distractions from them. You try to take away the stresses of what they need to do so that they can just do the best work possible. And sometimes that work could be very functional or executional. And other times it could just be like, these are just like creatives that are very good at one thing, or it could be script writers, could be comedy writers, whatever it may be. And you kind of just need to make sure that you surround them also with like the right type of input. that's how I always see my role, is be a very good creative filter and sponge for actually what's being said, what's being asked for, and being able to try to translate that for creatives to give them like pretty pointed direction. I don't think it's a matter of trying to get everyone all together and thinking everyone's going to
all the
get along.
meetings, right?
It doesn't really work. One of the things that I didn't expect when I joined Verizon, at least, was like when I was building out the in-house agency, there was so much excitement on my behalf, but also my CMO's behalf. A lot of people were very excited about this new capability, but the team, which was also my team that I inherited, which was the marketing team, were not very excited. And there's a bit of naivety to that, which is just like I was relinquishing control on creative decisions from some of that team and handing that over to creatives, right? Where I'm like, but this person is an amazing designer and I want them to make those design decisions. So yes, I'm taking that away from you. How do you shepherd some of those conversations? And look, I had the benefit of being the boss of both groups. So at the end of the day, I would make the call, but oftentimes creatives aren't in those positions, right? And they can be at the service of a marketing organization. And so at the end of the day, a marketing person is more than likely making the creative decision. It really depends on how you build that structure and where you decide to interface teams with the business, but you can't shield them completely either. It's a delicate balance of trying to make sure that people understand enough of the business so that you can do great work, which is why you have them in-house in the first place. Because if not, then they may as well just be at an agency or a creative vendor, in that respect.
So I guess it's a delicate balance of like silos and filters on it. It's almost like recreating those legacy agency processes, right? But like evolving the model in a way that isn't so rigid around, we have this big agency with a bunch of people and like, this is how we do things, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know if you remember the days when like you'd have the debate about media and the advertising agency and like where they were in that process, where media sometimes would be like, well, why are we not more upstream, right? And we should be helping to inform the way in which you're thinking about the creative. Fundamentally, you should just have a creative perspective earlier on in the conversation. And also that's true when you think about the platforms and where you want to distribute or how you want to show up. It is important to then maybe have your digital team or an experiential team more at the table having conversations with the marketers to help inform them on how we should be thinking about that particular brief. So I just think it's like making sure that creative is just more upstream and has an opinion or a voice at the table has shifted, I think, that dynamic. And I think, there are many examples now of brands that have creative leaders that are, either CMOs or work directly with the CEO because they're informing like the business strategy, right? Like, because you're so close to the customer, you understand, culture. These things are really important. And the more you can inform that, the better you're going to be in terms of just like helping to shape the type of work that a brand puts out in the world.
You've talked about protecting 70% mastery and forcing 30% discomfort. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, maybe this was just a little bit of my own kind of perspective on, what really invigorates me. And a lot of the roles that I've taken on, it's probably been a bit of that kind of dynamic where I've gone into a role with like probably 60 or 70% of being really good at what I do. And 30% is kind of a little bit of an unknown. It's like either I'm building out new capabilities could be a creative standpoint, it could be a new industry, it could be you're stepping into a leadership role. And so there's a lot of things that you're going to need to like pick up. But most people see you and value you for that. That's what they hired you for. But I think from a personal standpoint, what drives you is probably that 30%, which is like personal growth, career growth, you're learning new things. And so for me, that 30% is very important because over time, 2, 3 years in, 5 years in, you're going to be like, okay, like, what am I learning that's pushing me forward, right? It's a really important like litmus test for me to make sure that I'm constantly learning. And when I am, then I love what I do and I'm really excited by what I do. It also keeps you very motivated and a little bit on edge because like you're kind of in a good way, a little bit paranoid, like if you know everything. And so you're not going to be complacent. And I think like creatives can get complacent and things kind of get into a routine. And so how do you keep that edge there? I'm always kind of mindful of that balance and making sure that I don't lose that. And as soon as I do, I'm like, you know what, like maybe it's time for me to try something different because I've kind of filled that void of learning. And for creatives, I think it's really important to be just constantly in a state of learning and developing and building new skills and capabilities and staying close to what's going on in culture. The risk of brand side is that you can kind of just like get conditioned to what a brand is, and how do you keep yourself at the forefront of the industry is also really important.
Creative people are sort of like pretty sensitive and maybe a bit moody, and they're definitely a long way on the spectrum from like MBA,
Yeah,
sort of get it done, and it's like
yeah.
it's a fixed scope of what we need to do, and you sort of go through the list. Creativity is like amorphous, right? Like, what have you learned about leading creative people and getting the best work from them?
Yeah. We are an odd bunch of people, but that's what makes it amazing. And I think I do like to put different types of perspectives and cultures and backgrounds. I definitely like to mash them up. I think it's a good dynamic. I don't think I benefit by having lots of similar people in a room. So I like the different points of view that teams bring me. But I think you also just got to be honest with teams about like what is it that they are actually looking to do, and making sure that you're pointing them against those things. Most creatives are frustrated because they're not able to get something out of that experience, right? And that could be they're not learning something that they thought that they were coming in to learn. They're not producing. Maybe they're not executing the type of work or a style of work that they're looking for. Am I hiring someone that just wants to be a really great writer and write a particular style of
long copy ads?
Well, ads or TV scripts? And I did have that. I had a creative at Apple who came to me, and he was just kind of like, you know what, Andrew, I just want to write comedy scripts. And I was like, well, that's amazing that you know that, and you're in the wrong place. At that time, I was like,
yeah, why are you going to Apple?
I mean, more so now, like he probably would have done better now with Tor and kind of the new work of, like a little bit more entertainment and humor based. But at the time it was like, we don't really do humor. And that era was not really humor based. So, and I think it's like, it's making sure that like the creatives that you're hiring, like you're being transparent and truthful about what you are actually going to get them to do, and that they're being truthful and transparent about what they want. So, if you're going to hire an amazing gun designer, like make sure that you've got them on the right types of projects. And then I would say the teams that I need to be resilient and kind of robust are the ones that I look for as just like that flexibility and being able to adapt and kind of flex,
figure it out, make it happen.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, like roll up your sleeves, we'll figure it out. I definitely hire for that kind of sensibility, because that is probably the number one trait, or at least thing that I think creatives are successful with, is being able to adapt and take the knocks and pivot when needed. And that versatility is very valuable. So I look at teams as they need to be all rounders, but you also got to be careful that you're not just getting generalists and then they don't have a specific craft or a quality or conceptual chops. So it's tough. Like for me, when I'm looking for like really strong creatives that know how to concept and think big, but then are also able to take a bit of the beats when they come in. It's not easy.
How are you thinking about media in today's environment? I feel like it's changed a lot. Obviously, back in the day, it was nice and simple. We had TV and radio and print, and that was pretty much it. And I feel like now, obviously, social's everything. Most creatives and agencies still make scripts, 30-second scripts and films as the sort of main thing that they do. But I think there's a huge amount of different ways as a brand you can think about bringing either experiences to life or performance or conversion. And are there any spaces that you think are underutilized by brands?
I think it really comes back to what are the tools that a brand has. I always look at like the own platforms. You've already got an embedded audience with your customers, oftentimes across digital.com, social, retail, if you have a physical format. What I would consider high touch opportunities to speak to your customers that are often treated very transactionally. And so even when I think about building in-house teams, it's making sure that you focus on where you've got the ability to quickly impact a transformation for a brand by focusing on the sheer volume of things that you're going to put out in the world. I also just think of all the emerging media opportunities and how you need to earn them. Everything is essentially like a distribution channel. And so when I think about events or activations, it's with the mindset of like, okay, you have to really make this thing, knowing that only a certain amount of people are going to be able to maybe attend this event. The real scale and impact then is going to be on press. So it kind of forces you to be like, then that thing has to be really good.
Yeah.
Because if you're not getting press on that, and then that's not getting distributed and there's awareness around that, then 50 people went to it and that's it. I've seen a lot of wastage when it comes to like events and activations. It's like, really, like, is the ROI there? This became sharper for me working the last couple of years at a startup called Airco, Air Company, which was, going from my Verizon, like, $3 billion plus budget to like a $3 million budget, like you become pretty dialed into like, okay, like how are you going to get attention? But I would argue that we were able to get more press than I ever got at Verizon, by just being more deliberate about, thinking through the earned media opportunities and social and really like building community and advocacy within those communities as a way to build brand that I probably was not as kind of focused on at Verizon in particular, or Apple, because you're playing a different game. You're playing a big, broad, kind of sweeping exposure game.
This may sound unfair, but why are the emails so bad? And I'm not talking specifically about you, but like in general, you mentioned some of the owned channels as being most important. And I think just as a consumer, emails to me feels like the most underappreciated and worst handled channel of anything that like 99% of brands have. Like, why is that?
I mean, it probably because the CRM team is a little offshoot somewhere that is not really getting the time they deserve or the creative attention that it should. There are great CRM agencies, but it's also like internally, it's kind of operated usually through a business unit as part of like customer acquisition or retention. And so I just don't think it really gets a strong creative lens to it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's probably a lot of opportunity there. I think it also gets run through the performance machine. And therefore, as long as it's hitting a certain amount of numbers that, the team is looking for, it's like, it's good enough.
Sort of pivoting to OpenAI, I feel like AI is one of the things that will give everybody the ability to have a really well targeted email machine that considers context of current customers. Because I can't tell you how many times I've lost my affinity for a brand because they've just overcooked the emails or texts and
Yeah.
haven't figured out a way to unify my data on their
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah.
But I feel like AI is one of those things that helps with like scale and at least some level of personalization that, you know, can potentially. I know no one really wants to talk about CRM or email, but to me, it's just it's the most important channel you have with a customer for the most part, and it's just like so poorly executed.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think it's like, it's always been that way as well. Right. Like, I think I've seen agencies, and we worked with agencies at different brands. That's their core focus. I would hope, like, the ability to integrate AI in a way that's going to make sure that what the customer is receiving is actually, relevant and is not frustrating for them, and is not like at a frequency that is getting them to unsubscribe. Um, but I don't know. Like, I mean, I still get all those emails. They kind of get filtered now through my email box, but I would say that I'm not responding to a
We've
lot of
ruined email, basically.
a lot of like organic, outreach email that comes in my inbox.
You mentioned merch before.
Yeah.
I actually think, aside from the Isle of Any campaign, the OpenAI merch store is one of the smartest moves I saw in 25 from a brand perspective, because very important detail, you constrain supply. I think it was one item per person, right? Like you could only buy one thing. And suddenly that small detail just totally changed the equation, in that it was like, oh, I only get to choose one thing. Oh, what am I going to choose? Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's artificially limiting supply, which drives, desirability, obviously, sort of plays into like drop culture. But I thought that was such a genius move.
We used merch as well when I was at Echo as a way to communicate our story. And we did the fuel store at the time, which was basically a futuristic gas station on Mars that had merch and products that you could buy and bid on, but had a pretty strong product backstory to that. Like, people like this, like people like stories, right? And it's just like merch, if done well, has great backstories. And I think for OpenAI and a lot of the things that we do around merch, I mean, that was the first time that we had opened it up to the public. But the merch kind of like culture and DNA of the company is very strong. It's a pretty special thing that has been reserved only for employees, and it has like really strong kind of stories behind what those things represent, and they're a historical kind of timestamp of the company in a lot of ways. So even from an employee standpoint, like if you're wearing something that was,
status, right?
2022 era, like you're kind of like, oh, these guys are like, even though we're 10 years old, it's like you're kind of
OG.
like 2022 is pretty early on.
Yeah.
And so like that's the power of, I think, great brands, right? Is understanding, the storytelling vessels that you have and how people, love a great story, right? It comes back to that. And so I think us putting those out into the world was a bit of like, hey, look, like we get a lot of requests for items and merch through our partners. So we're always kind of thinking about objects and what they mean. I'm also more conscious of like, let's be mindful of what we're putting out in the world, right? Like, let's make sure things have meaning. Let's not just put more junk into the world. And I think we kind of come from that perspective as well. Also, we're an AI company, right? The physicality of things is only going to become more important. The craft of things is only going to become more important. And same with like things that feel human and have emotion. So like tangible things are a way to, bring people closer to the brand.
How do you explain to your parents what you do?
uh, I think I lost them once I joined OpenAI. I think at that point they were like, I don't really
That's
get.
why we have the merch, right? Give them
Um,
the merch.
yeah, I think they've been tracking for the most part. Like my dad, he used to oversee marketing early on in his career, and so
There you go.
he understands that world, and so does my mom. But like, and they understood the journey of like you're a creative and you make TV spots and like you make things, and over time, obviously that's evolved. But I think now, like there's a big kind of gap when it comes to like, so wait, like I think they know that like I'm gonna go and probably think about what the brand needs to go and do around this particular moment in time. But what it is, this moment we're in, it's tough. It's tough for them. It's tough for a lot of people to understand like what's going on.
Yeah, pretty historic, I think. But yeah, speaking of that, what are you most excited for in 26?
Staying healthy, getting outdoors. I try to keep a pretty clean separation of work and life these days. Work is not everything. I've learned that through some tough lessons as well, like over grinding, overworking, and I think the industry's in a place like that, especially on the agency side. I think you're hearing a lot about that. I put my value with my family and my kids and spending time with them as much as I can, and so I'm excited about being healthy and being able to be active. It's winter at the moment, so we're skiing a lot, and
Nice.
I feel like we're super lucky to be able to do that. And
East
like,
Coast skiing though.
it's true, but if you can ski East Coast, you can ski anywhere. Yeah.
Icy, just super icy.
But I learned kind of on ice. Like even in New Zealand, we were North Island skiers, and that was pretty icy. And you kind of just get used to it. You figure it out, and like I kind of I don't know, it's a thing.
I was spoiled because I did 2 seasons in Colorado when I
Yeah,
was in my 20s in Copper Mountain. So
yeah,
after
yeah.
that, it's very hard to go anywhere.
Yeah, we try to do that nowadays. We know we try to make sure that we find a bigger mountain, a less icy mountain. But that's what excites me. I just seeing like nature is something that continues to inspire me. And it's probably goes back to my New Zealand roots of like I'm in New York City, so I don't get enough of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you get close to nature, like you puts things in perspective pretty quickly.
And speaking of disconnecting from work, we've talked to a lot of creatives who their creative process is some form of like being together to sort of talk about a problem and goals and objectives and what we're setting out to do. And then I feel like there's this sort of disconnection and maybe a subconscious creative process that somehow generates the amazing ideas. Like, and some creatives do weird things like sit upside down or find a song. Is there
Yeah.
anything weird that you do in your creative process?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm stuck on something and I've got like a big problem that I'm trying to wrestle with, the reality is like your brain is always thinking, right? So the subconscious is there, and it's kind of working on that problem. And oftentimes it's like you just get into kind of like repetitive modes of and ways of thinking. So oftentimes for me, it's just like going to the gym. I do yoga as well. And so like that often helps to just be like kind of reset. I think resetting is pretty important. So either through exercise or getting out into, I feel like I reset each weekend because I'm on a mountain and you kind of disconnect. Other things that I used to do is like physical labor, like doing things like, being in a garden or like digging and planting a tree, where you become very focused on pretty like basic tasks. It's actually the separation of like conceptual thinking and to doing things that are quite focused and simple. Other things that allow me to try to like kind of come to new spaces and ways of thinking. It's through those kind of like just being very task oriented that unlocks it for me. But I do think like the point about like teams coming together, I still think that like whenever I get people in a room and we discuss something. It's just more organic, and we kind of it very quickly resolves itself versus even being, on a Zoom or like definitely Slack culture right now in terms of just like kind of communicating things and it's just like you don't get the nuance, you don't get the kind of the hallway conversation, right? And so I still think that there's a lot of value with like just getting with teams and talking it out and like, sitting in silence, right? Like sometimes thinking through things, you got to let it happen.
I'm interested in your advice to junior, creatives out there who want to do what you do one day.
I mean, it goes back to a little bit of like the more versatile and the more hands-on in terms of like solving problems, whatever the problems are, I think will always be valuable. I think,
get amongst it.
Yeah, like and creativity is obviously having a renaissance because of all of the conversations around AI. So I think like, there is value back in our world, which I think is amazing. But I do think like the importance of building relationships is super critical because again, COVID era, post COVID, just remote work cultures. To date, still all of my network and new networks has not really been created through a Zoom. And yes, I've benefited from experience and being a little bit like longer in my career where you are building relationships over time. But I'm also doing that with like young people again, right? Like I'm still hanging out and trying to understand what the 22-year-olds are
The youth.
thinking about,
Yeah.
the youth, right? You need to continue to build that ecosystem of value with people so that when those times come, people think of you and they know that you're a great resource or a great reliable person to solve problems, right? Like whenever I'm like stuck, like that's when you usually are thinking of people. You're like, we need someone to help on this thing, right? So who are you going to reach out to? You're going to reach out to someone that you've worked with in the past that has solved a tough problem for you. And I think like I am that to many people, which is why I'm probably fortunate enough to get the roles that I have, is because people know that I'm up for a tough challenge. I don't say no to many things in terms of like, all right, what do you need help on? Like, let's get amongst it. And I'll try and help you. I think I can solve that for you. And that is very valuable. And I think it continues to be valuable.
Okay, one last question. You talked about Apple a little bit, and I think discipline and consistency are sort of the superpowers when it comes to brand building.
The consistency thing is pretty nuanced because I think like a lot of people see that as just like kind of maybe repeating things like either executions or messages in a very literal way. And I actually think that because we operate in a very like attention deficit kind of environment where no one can really absorb or grab your message, that just coming back to similar themes and similar messages, but reframed in new ways, is a very powerful branding tool that I think, the best brands do very well. That if you were to peel away all the executional layers or mediums or in ways in which those messages are communicated, they come back to like something that's actually pretty consistent in its core DNA. And so I think like brands that figured that out and kind of repeat those things, but really reframe it and create dynamic ways of expressing that are the ones that I think then actually reach their customers and also have more relevance and empathy to the product or to the brand, is because they're actually just being consistent. They're showing up in ways that like we understand. And yet I think that is it's an under leveraged capability and tool, because we also just like you just are never in that constant state of consuming a brand's message. So like someone may have missed it. Like
it's like bits and pieces, right?
You're just constantly missing stuff from brands. So like, but then when you do catch it, it's like, okay, like I feel like that's familiar. And I think that's really important.
But like slightly novel too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Andrew. Well, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And
appreciate
thanks
it.
for coming on Second Wind.
Yeah.
It's been
awesome.
It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.